All right, get ready, get stiff. That's our vibe today. We're getting stiff in so many different ways over here. Today we have Alexis and Shannan. They are the host of the Get Stiff podcast, pun intended. They both come from a bunch of different aspects in areas of funeral service and bereavement care, and they have a wonderful podcast that helps breach sort of the gap between us morticians and the general public. Would you say that's a lot of what you're trying to do out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We definitely have a lot of experience in death care, both Lex and I. And we really kind of want to, like you said, bridge that gap sort of between, all the things that we know as funeral professionals and what we talk about, and kind of not only empowering the public to have more conversations and be more prepared, but just not to be so terrified of this huge, daunting topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I like to think of it as like lifting the veil, because there's always this veil between the general public and what we do as funeral professionals. So I always say, we lift the veil and kind of expose people to what truly goes on, because most of the time the general public has absolutely no idea what we do.
Right. That's such a fair point. And we try to do that in different aspects. Like for our TikTok feed, when we do TikToks, we know that is like way more for the general public. So you try to bring terms that they're going to understand. And then when we're doing videos on Instagram, for example, almost always we're doing it targeted at morticians. So it's funny that you really have to be cognizant of who you're talking to, what you're talking about, because we do have so much terminology in the industry that we throw around and we understand, and it's like second nature. But not everyone understands that. Not everyone in the general public. And when you're trying to explain situations, especially when it has to do with behind the scenes stuff, we really have to remember to keep ourselves in their shoes so they can understand what we're trying to talk about, and that way they can get some value and really comprehend what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, exactly. And I think of it kind of as like when you go to the doctor, right? And sometimes they're speaking in medical terminology and all these terms, and you have no idea. And you're like, what did he just say? I don't even know. And you feel overwhelmed. And we want to lessen that as much as possible when people come into funeral homes, so it's not so scary. And you kind of have more of an understanding as to what's going on and what is going to happen to your loved one, and more of the process. And that for us is really, really important.
Yeah, it's important now more than ever, because everyone is so informed into every aspect of everyone's lives so much. And that's why people are so curious about our industries, because there is a gap between the common knowledge of what someone in funeral service knows and what the general public know. So any way to bridge that gap will help us to demonstrate what we do. I think it's just so imperative in this day and age to do that, especially when we're going through things, when a family's selecting a type of service. We throw around the terms like direct cremation, direct burial, rental casket, things like that all the time, and we don't even sometimes recognize it or think twice about it. Those are things when people have never been through a loss, they have no clue what you're talking about. And a lot of us will like giggle at that, like, oh, come on, you don't know what a direct cremation is? No, people don't know what that is. So we need to be the stewards of that. And I love that you two are trying to demonstrate that connection and show, hey, we need to step up to the plate and inform the general public so that they're understanding every situation they get into, especially when it comes to that time when they're having an unimaginable loss. That's when they need to be prepared. And they're not going to be doing that, researching online. They're not going to have time to do all that stuff. So by making videos and podcasts like the three of us often do, people can get a grasp on that before it's an urgent matter.
No, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, getting that grasp of it before it's a problem. Because once you experience a loss, people are in this fog. And even I remember when I lost my fiance, that's kind of what kicked all this off. My fiance passed away suddenly in 2017, right after I had started blogging. Thank you. Right after I had started blogging. And it was weird to see that it's like at that point I had been licensed for 7 years, and I realized I have been doing this wrong. I've been doing this wrong. Like you think you know what families need. And we come from, of course, most funeral directors are pretty empathetic and we want to help. And that's why we get into this industry of service, is we want to do good. And so I had to really step back and say the things that these people were saying to me, it wasn't really helpful. And oh my goodness, if I didn't already know what was going to happen, I'd be absolutely lost. And there was this mortician that I worked with in my early, like in my career, in the blogs. I call him Mr. Jones, this very old mortician, this old crotchety man.
We all have a Mr. Jones.
We all do. We all do. And he's not particularly friendly, is not how I would describe him, but he was very gracious and very helpful. And I learned so much. And he would always say, talk to them like they're 5. And so when he would like show me, he's like, how does this work? And I'm like, I do this, this, and this. He goes, great, like I'm 5. Because when you get into this state of grief, you're in almost like a paralysis. You have Dr. Whitney Griffin, who we had on our show, talked about it like grief brain, like pregnancy brain, where it's like you have this short-term memory loss. And people aren't retaining what you're giving them. And so you have to look at it as explaining to them, as if they're 5 years old, and repeating yourself a lot and watching your cadence and your tone and making sure that people understand what's going to happen next. Because you're absolutely right. We know what a rental casket is. We know what a ceremonial casket is. And depending on where you are, you refer to it as the Brockton Oak. And we know what that means. But a lot of families don't know. And they're like, what do you mean? Like you're going to put someone else in it? And so it is important to explain all of these things that seem minute and small and insignificant to us. But it's a huge deal to someone who's trusting us with the most important person to them.
Very well said. I have a story that expands on that. I'm right with you too. We have to bring it at that 5-year-old level, not 5th grade, 5-year-old level. I think you have to do that with anything. This is my opinion. We do a lot of marketing for funeral homes, and when we're trying to explain things or sending out emails or text message for a family that is interested in a funeral home, you have to keep it at a max, like a 2nd grade reading level. And that is like standard across all industries. It doesn't matter if it's funeral homes, whatever else. People resonate and they're able to comprehend it more, so they understand the intention of what you're saying, as opposed to trying to throw out a lot of big words and impress someone with your vocabulary, as I stutter and say vocabulary with like 2 L's. But trying to impress someone in that manner, which like good for you. Like I'm well educated, but at the same time, you have to meet people at the equal playing field so they can fully understand what you're trying to say. And that's a good thing. I don't know. That's one tangent I can go on for days about, because I've learned the hard way trying to make things a little bit more elaborate, trying to explain to families on what we're doing, and sugarcoating a lot is what we do in the funeral industry, trying to make it seem not as harsh for the different things that we're doing. But at the end of the day, it's like you have to tell them, hey, we need to have a high neck shirt for your mother. Like that's okay. Like you don't have to be like, oh, we would love the garments to really fully clothe. No, tell them what you need, because if you don't, they're not going to understand, and they're going to be confused, and they're going to just add to more of their grief. So those are like my tangents. You have to be direct as much as you can be without being rude or mean. There's that fine line that we have to tiptoe.
Yeah, and I think it's super important too that we're really thorough with how we explain and why we explain. Otherwise, we leave that room for question. And I don't ever want people or families to think that we're hiding things. So that's why it's really important to be like, we do need you to bring in a long sleeve for your mother because of X, Y, Z, and kind of explain to them. That way things aren't so scary and they understand. Because when you don't understand is when you start making those assumptions, and people already have all these crazy ideas about people who work in the funeral industry. So just being really open and honest with families, I feel, is what really works the best for me. So they're comfortable with that and they resonate so much better with that.
Absolutely. 100%. Couldn't agree more. I mean, you hit the nail into the coffin there. You have to be thorough in the. I'm full of funeral puns. Don't worry. You have to be so thorough. Like you have to explain. You have to be in touch with them every step of the way. I've learned that in my years in funeral directing. You have to let them know. Okay, you need to sign this release of remains form, and then I will go pick up your mother from the hospital. I will let you know when we have her in our care. I will let you know when it's time for you to come see mom. All those, like every step of the way, we need to be thorough and explain, because then they'll understand what we're doing at all times, as opposed to, like both of you have hit on, keeping things dark and then it seems sketchy or shady, when of course we're not trying to be. We're trying to do it in their best interest. But let's try to avoid that, is one thing I'm going to say, for
Yeah.
our funeral directors. We got to try to avoid that so we can just be on the best light for our families.
I think you're absolutely right, Michael. I think you touched on something that a lot of, it's like, I think the number one mistake that funeral directors make is that we know we're coming from a good place and we want to protect these families, but we have to remember that we are strangers to them. And it's not our job,
Right.
not our role to make them feel better. There is nothing that a stranger can say that will make you feel better about the loss you've just experienced. And so
Correct.
I have this saying that transparency trumps compassion, in that by
Mm.
telling you exactly what's going to happen and saying, okay, we brought your mother in from the coroner's office. You know that she had an autopsy. That means we're going to need a high neck. And if they say why, I always preface it with, if you have, I'm more than happy to answer any question. Make sure you want the answer because I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah.
And you need
Yeah.
to know why we're asking these things. And the amount of families I've noticed, and early on, I did the whole, well, it would be nice, and then getting frustrated because families weren't listening or they weren't taking our
Mhm.
advice. But the reality
Right.
is, we are the professionals, we are the experts, we know the why. And it's our responsibility. The burden falls on us to explain that to families instead of, it's not our job to protect their feelings. As harsh
Yeah.
and as callous as that may sound, that's not why we're there. They have family,
Yeah.
friends, they have maybe their pastor that they brought to the arrangement. They have people there to support them. We're not there to make them feel better. We're there to get them through this. We're there because they don't know what
Mm.
to do and we do. And it's even
Mm.
it's, I think, by being transparent and by being open and honest with our families, that brokers that trust more than any condolence ever could. I remember,
Yeah.
just a quick little story time. I remember one very early on in my career, I stopped telling people I was sorry for their loss. And the reason for that is because I had this woman say to me, how many times have you had to say that today? And and I realized, it hit me. I'm like, this kind of sounds insincere, even though I mean it. I am sorry that this
Right.
happened, but it's like, also, if you're here, that means I get paid, and then whatever. But I get that, where it's like, you're making money from talking to me. Like, no, you're not sorry. And so I've kind of shifted to, instead of saying I'm sorry for your loss, which they're going to hear a million times over from every person they walk into, I always say, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for
Ooh.
trusting me. And that, I find, it's one, because they don't hear that very often. And it sounds more sincere because no matter how many times you've said it in a day, you are taking the most important person to someone and doing God knows what with them, because they don't know. I mean, they're trusting that we're doing the right thing. We know we're doing the right thing. But
Yeah.
that's a lot of trust to put into a stranger.
It sure is. I mean, I love every bit of that. It's something that I want to use as well, because we try to do so much because we are empathetic people. So we try to be the ones that are there for them and to hold their hand, and then also to lead them and to guide them. Maybe we need to focus on, hey, we're here to like do our job to the best of our ability, and to give your family the service that they deserve, and to make sure that you are comfortable and everything is taken care of down to the exact detail that you're looking for. So that's just a different frame of mind that I haven't really thought about, because it's like built in me to be empathetic and understanding. Like that's part of why I love being in funeral service. But at the same time, we are the experts. So if we need to put our, our foot down on some things and say, hey, I really don't recommend seeing dad. He went through something horrific, and it's out of our hands of what we can do. We can try to incorporate something. Maybe you could touch his hand or whatever the case. I'm just like spitballing a random scenario that we might find ourselves in because we've all been there. But rather than sugarcoating and being soft, maybe it's good to come hard and say, hey, this is what we need to do, and this is how you need to get through everything during this time.
Absolutely. I remember you brought me back to a time where just, maybe you can see his hand, or maybe you can do this. I love that, finding a way to say yes. And we try to do that a lot, is just try to find ways to say yes. But I definitely, I agree with you there. I feel like I'm stuttering too. You see, you're stuttering, I'm stuttering.
We're just so passionate about what we're doing that it just rolls off the tongue. Shannan, tell me about your career then. You're a funeral director. How'd you get involved in funeral service in the first place? And what was the beginning of your career like, and how did it lead to where you are today?
So I feel like most people have gotten into the industry one of two ways. Either they had a family member that owned a funeral home and they were kind of born into it.
Yep, that's me.
Or they are like, always have been obsessed with death and morbid curiosity. And Alexis is rolling her eyes at me.
It's
But,
true. It's true.
it's
And
true.
there's nothing wrong with that. I love those people.
Yeah, I was neither of the two. For me, it was very random. I was in my undergrad career at UC Riverside in California, and I was tired of working at Kmart. And so my roommate at the time was dating this guy, and his family owned several funeral homes, and his dad needed a personal assistant. I needed a new job. And I started just by answering the phones and kind of managing his calendar. I would do like community events and stuff like that. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And eventually, the longer I was there, he'd be like, come to the back. Let me show you something. And he did all the operations. His wife met with the families, and I just kind of bounced between them. And then I worked a lot with Mr. Jones, the other older mortician. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the industry. I fell in love with the work, just the families that we serve. And I just have been absolutely enthralled ever since. I started blogging in 2017, and that's when I Do Death kind of started and came about, with our Mortuary Monday blog posts. So I'm an OG in, I guess, the blogging world, I don't know. But just trying to find ways to tell stories and just kind of share things that I've learned over the years, and hopefully they would help someone else. And then I met Alexis in the Bay, and we just kind of clicked. I've worked at a lot of different funeral homes in the LA area. I won't say any names, but from private to corporate to,
I'll get in trouble. Come on now.
I won't do that. Don't do it. But I've been very honored to work on a lot of very cool funeral services. I like to joke about, my family has this joke where it's like, oh, I'm your fave's funeral director. And I'll share with you offline. But I've definitely done probably some of the coolest things that I'll never post publicly, and some I'm not even allowed to talk about. But I'm just very blessed to be in this position with this knowledge in this area. And I just am hoping to share that knowledge with all of these newer funeral directors that are coming up, and just even families that we've served in the past, and people that we connect with, be them doulas or grief educators or therapists, and just try to create a platform to show that there is support for people after the funeral, but also helping them get through that as well, and kind of straddling both sides of that line.
Yeah, how mystical. You're hiding all the parts that I want to unpack. Like, come on, you got to give me something. I'm going to come back to you. Lex, I want to hear the rundown of your career, because you have a very different aspect in bereavement and loss services and such. So give me your rundown, and we're going to come together, and I need to hear a story from each of you. I want to hear your biggest banger of a story. Your Gettin Stiff story.
Okay, so Shannon always makes fun of me because I was completely the Nightmare Before Christmas kid and like the little morbid, curious, asking billions of questions type of kid. But I initially started off studying forensics. So my background is kind
Oh,
of, yeah, I wanted to be a crime scene investigator and I worked with criminal attorneys going to crime scenes and such from that aspect. But it just wasn't really fulfilled. And I knew that on my mom's side, my great grandma was a mortician, but I didn't really
okay.
know what that entailed and what it meant. So once I got to the point where I was miserable with studying just chemistry all day, I talked to my mom and I was
Weren't
like,
we all?
seriously. And we still have to know chemistry, even in embalming and such when I went to mortuary school. But so yeah, that kind of led me to being curious about what happens in mortuaries because I'm like, well, I know that my grandma was a mortician, but what did she do? Exactly what does that mean? So
Yeah.
I just on a whim applied for a funeral home position just as a receptionist, just so I could get kind of an idea of what went on inside of them. And I immediately fell in love. Actually, at my interview, it's funny, and Shannon knows because this is our mutual boss at where we met. But at the time for my interview, he took me into two different chapel setups, and they were full chapel setups, but I think he was just testing me to make sure that I could handle it because there were people, there were
Uh-huh.
caskets, there was flowers, like everything there.
Yeah.
And I walked straight up to the caskets and I was like, "Oh wow, like she looks nice," or "Oh wow, like what's going on here?" Like asking questions, and I just became
Mhm.
obsessed. So from there, it took off. I worked in funeral homes, literally doing everything from answering phones to embalming to working funerals to doing removals to anything and everything that you could do. And then from there, I was like built a friendship at the medical examiner when I was doing removals. And I was really curious to see an autopsy because oftentimes when I go into removals there, they'd be in the middle of doing autopsies and such.
Sure.
So I started to do autopsies just to kind of learn. You know,
Excited. Yeah.
yeah, I had put people back together, but I hadn't helped take them apart, and I wanted to know what went on. And so I could further explain to families when they really didn't understand autopsies and what was going on and why we needed to help. I started volunteering for hospice and I started working really closely with hospice, just kind of to have more experience. I had been on the death side of things, but wanted to see more of the transition from life to death and helping families
Mhm.
with that transition. So I've had a very wide spectrum of all kinds of aspects of end of life and afterlife care. So it's been pretty interesting.
Yeah, you do have a good variety of things underneath your in your belt and your tool belt there. It's good to have that well-roundedness when we're in this industry and just try to find out what's your own. You can even do
Mm-hmm.
that as a funeral director or a mortician. Like there's so many different aspects of being a mortician specifically that your career could look totally different every 10 years. So it's fun that you're able to transition between and find what's exactly right for you. So
Mm-hmm.
let's hear that story. I want to hear a story from each of you from your career that our morticians are going to love. You're going to knock their socks off and you're going to have to put on some plastic stockings because they're so fired up to hear your story.
Shannon, you go
Shannon, you're up. Come
first.
on. I know you got one. Let's go.
No
Stop
pressure.
hiding. This is the Mortuary Show. Come on.
Oh man. Let's see. What do you want? Like a scary story? Or do you want like just a
Yeah,
regular fun
whatever floats your
story?
boat, whatever moves the needle. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I was not prepared for this. All right. Well, I guess this is kind of a fun one. We've talked about this one before, Alexis. This was maybe in the early years of my career as a funeral, and also just to back up, she went to mortuary. I did not go to mortuary school. I am and I know funeral directors around the country feel a way about that, but in California, as long as you have at least an associate's degree, you can take the test. And so I took the test after my second year of college when I had the equivalency of units and I passed so I actually learned,
Hey.
I learned like on the fly. Like
Yeah, you learn as you go. Yeah.
I learned in the funeral home and like I had been working there for about 2 years when I finally took the test. So
Yeah.
anyway, so I'm
Everyone
not an
finds their way.
embalmer.
Yeah.
I don't want to falsely represent, I'm not an embalmer, but just about everything else. I'll be back there. Anyway, So this was one of my first cases that I had worked on, like doing the cosmetology, hair, dressing, casketing, everything. I was maybe 20 at the time. And I was so excited for the family to, and also terrified for the family to see her. They were coming down. And I'll never forget that's not my mama coming from the other room. And
No.
we know that's them. And it's like, and there's the logical part of your brain that knows that, that, they probably haven't seen her in a long time. This woman had been sick for a long time and all of that. But there's always that one. And so my heart just dropped. And Mr. Jones, and up until this point, I thought he was like the meanest man in the world. But Mr. Jones said, no, we're going to go on in there. You hear it? We have to go on in there. And I'm like, he's like, you did it. Like, we got to go on in there. So I go in the room. We go in the viewing room. And she says, that's not my mother. And he said, you're going to be there, but I'll explain. And so he goes on to tell her, she was sick. When's the last time you saw her? All of that.
Yeah.
And so she wasn't having it. She said, she's supposed to look like she's sleeping. She doesn't look like she's sleeping. And he says, that's because she's not sleeping, baby. She's dead.
Oh, now that's a one-liner, Mr. Jones.
So it comes full circle. So I'm at this point shocked, and I'm just like, this lady is gonna punch him, something. I'm trying to inch out of the room, and
I'm like, do I go in there and like check the tag? Like I would be freaking. I'm like, did I make an insane error? It's impossible.
So he turns it into a Full House moment. He says, think about this. She's not sleeping. When you move out of a house, you take all of your furniture, you take the pictures off of the walls, you do your clean, you may have to paint it back to start white if you're renting, move everything out of the home. By the time all of the stuff is moved out of that house, it's no longer a home. It doesn't look the same because what made it a home is gone. So what made her is gone. She's not in there anymore. She's not alive. She's not breathing. She's not speaking to you. There's no rosiness in her cheeks. There's no soul, if that's what you believe in. She's moved out. What you're looking at is an empty house. So of course it's not going to look the same. And that, she just starts to break down. So she goes, so she's not sleeping. She's absolutely not sleeping. And no amount of work that this very skilled young lady, he did tell her I did it, that this very
defer. You gotta defer.
She's asleep because she's simply not. And this lady starts sobbing, crying. She hugs him. She hugs me. She's apologizing. And it just was a beautiful full circle moment that started as complete terror.
Wow, that's an unpleasant place to be in at 20 years old. Like, God, I'm honestly so proud of you for sticking with it, because something like that could knock you out. That could be like, I am done. No way. If a family's going to react like this, one out of every X amount of times, I don't even care how many, I'm out. So good for you for sticking with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The story
All right,
always
Lex, your
makes me
turn. Let's go.
Oh my God. I feel like I have so many just crazy kind of stories in between, like me getting trapped in the prep room. I've gotten locked in freaking refrigeration so many times because all of our stuff is electronic and the power goes out and I sit there in pitch black darkness by myself. That has
How'd you
happened.
get out?
I
How'd you
had
get
to
out of there? You have your
wait.
cell
I
phone?
had to sit. No, I had to sit because what had happened was I went to go retrieve the body. The medical examiner said, hey, we're going to work on this case next. Go and get so-and-so. So I stroll in there to go get so-and-so. And keep in mind, I worked for a really big county. So at this time, I mean, there's probably hundreds of bodies put into these coolers. So I go to go get so-and-so, and everything at the medical examiner is electronic, including the doors to get into the cooler.
Sure.
So I go, and I'm literally in a good minute or two, and then all of a sudden everything just goes pitch black, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm in the middle of all of these bodies, and if something moves, I didn't have my phone because I don't need my phone on me. I'm doing autopsies and such. So
God.
I was in there good, and I'm like, if something touches me, if I hear something, like, what do I do? And I can't move because if I move, I'm going to run into bodies. I'm surrounded at this point by hundreds of bodies. I'm in the middle. So I'm like, okay, I just stand here and I wait. And I wait and I wait. And luckily, maybe like 2 or 3 minutes later, the backup generator finally kicked in and things started to slowly like clink back on. But for a good 2 minutes, I was in pitch black darkness, surrounded by hundreds of bodies. And luckily, I didn't feel anything or hear anything, because it would have been. And no one even, I don't even know if anyone even knew I was in there. Like the medical
Right.
examiner probably mindlessly, he was in the middle of doing a case. So he probably was just like, oh, like she's taking a long time. Like what's going on? And then the power went out. But yeah.
Wow.
And that
I
wasn't
mean,
the
you could
only
have,
time either.
right, you could have been locked in there for hours and could have gotten frostbite or
Could have.
something and died.
I
I
could
mean, let me go through your mind during this 2 to 3 minute here.
Yeah.
Is there any point of you thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to cuddle up next to somebody to stay warm? Like, what am I gonna do?
If it resorted to that, I might have had to. Like the initial thought was, okay, what do I do? Like, I don't have my phone and I don't want to move because I don't want to risk pushing someone off of their gurney or off of anything. And
Yeah.
that was fully surrounded by me because I had already started to take him out. So it's like there was people there was people behind me, there's people all surrounding me. So in any
Goodness.
direction I went, I would have knocked probably at least 4 to 5 people over because they're stacked. And so I was like, okay, what do I do? Do I just stand here? So I literally like just pinned straight for like a minute. And I'm like, okay, no one has noticed. Like everything's still pitch black. And it was, yeah, I tried not to immediately panic because that's like,
Yeah.
I'm an anxious person. And I knew if I like started to panic, it would have been like a really big spiral. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely. And that's happened to me a few times. So much so that I started bringing my phone with me every single time just in case. I learned my
I would
lesson.
too. At least you got a flashlight on the bad boy if it's not working.
I don't know. I might see something I don't want to see.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories and for what you do every day, helping people connect with funeral directors, with the general public. Very important stuff, and everyone should go listen to their podcast. Just like you do for us, you got to get it on in the prep room, get it on the way to work, and it'll help the time pass by just like that. Thank you both so much for coming.
Thank you
Thank you for
having
having
us.
us.
Yeah, this is fun.
This is a lot of fun.